Hi, I'm Ted Haftagaber, founder and producer of Live Talks Los Angeles. Thanks for joining us. Since we started over a decade ago, we have brought you hundreds of conversations with storytellers, writers, actors, musicians, humorists, chefs, and thought leaders in business and science. You can watch and hear most of these in our YouTube channel and our podcast. For details, visit livetalksla.org. And now, here's the show you've tuned in to see. We welcome Congressman Adam Schiff and Larry Wilmore to Live Talks Los Angeles. They'll discuss Schiff's book, Midnight in Washington: How We Almost Lost Our Democracy and Still Could. Adam Schiff is the United States Representative for California's 28th District. He is chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, and he served as a lead manager in the first impeachment trial of Donald Trump. Emmy Award winner Larry Wilmore has been a television producer, actor, comedian, and writer for more than 25 years. He can also be heard as host of Larry Wilmore, Black on the Air on the Ringer Podcast Network. They will talk, and we will include some questions sent in from you in the audience. Take it from here, Larry.
It's a pleasure to be back. I haven't done this in a while, and it's nice to come back with a guy who I voted for many times because he happens to be my congressman. And he's one of the most important people we actually have in Congress right now for a number of reasons. I'm so happy to talk with him this evening. And he has a new book out, and it's called Midnight in Washington: How We Almost Lost Our Democracy and Still Could. Representative Adam Schiff, welcome to LA Live Talks.
Thank you. It's great to be on your show. I'm a big fan.
Oh, I'm a big fan. Like I said, I've followed your career, voted for you for many years. Always rooting for, the home team in there when you have all those fights. It's a really cool book. I love how you, well, first of all, I mean, the opening is like a movie, of that harrowing take on Capitol Hill during that, insurrection. It was so surreal. Let me just ask you first, what was going through your mind during that in real time, Adam? Is it still vivid in your memory?
Oh, it's very vivid in my memory. And when I was on the floor for the whole thing.
Yeah.
A few months before the election, I had proposed to the speaker that we form a little group to try to predict all the things that might go wrong in the election and get ready for it. What happened if a state would send two slates of electors, or
yes,
vice president wouldn't recognize electors or whatnot? We gamed out about 1,000 different possibilities, except, of course, the one that happened. None of us predicted the Capitol would be attacked. And but I was on the floor as one of four managers to lead the opposition to this effort to overturn the election. And I really wasn't paying attention to what was going on outside the Capitol because I was
you had no sense that was brewing and that was like on its way and bubbling at that time, right?
I really didn't. I was so intent on what I was going to say, what the Republicans were saying. The first thing I noticed something wrong was I looked up and the speaker was gone. And I knew she was intending to preside the whole time. And I thought that was strange. And then almost immediately after I noticed that the speaker was no longer in her chair, two Capitol police officers came on the House floor and grabbed our number two, Steny Hoyer, and whisked him off the House floor so fast.
Wow.
I remember thinking, I've never seen Steny move that fast.
Yes.
But then the police came back repeatedly to tell us, you need to grab a gas mask.
Right.
You may need to get down on the floor. And then we needed to
your whole body must have changed at that point when people are talking gas mask and, the speaker's gone and Steny is gone. I mean, it's almost like the dinosaur brain takes over, you just immediately, it becomes a little different in there, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the thing that was so surreal, among other things, is these masks weren't like you see in the movies or you see police officers, riot police. They were a hood, basically a big plastic bag you pulled over your head. And the idea of a plastic bag, pulled over your head, sealed around the neck, was enough to get my pulse moving anyway.
Yes.
But when you took this thing out, there was a fan that would circulate the air so you didn't asphyxiate. And the fan made this buzzing sound. And so there's this buzzing going on all over the House chamber, like a bunch of hornets had been let loose. And then, eventually we heard people banging on the doors and breaking glass to get in. And I had a couple of the Republicans come up to me and say, "You need to get out. You can't let them see you." One of them said, I know these people. I can talk to these people. You're in a whole different category.
So they weren't, some of the Republicans weren't afraid?
They were scared too.
Yeah.
But they felt they were not as much at risk as I was, being such a visible opponent of Donald Trump. But one of them that I walked out with ultimately was carrying a large wooden post that had been affixed to the floor with a hand sanitizer on the top of it that he was going to use as a club to defend himself. And I said to him, "Are you really that worried?" And he said, "Yes, I think I just heard gunshots, which must have been when Ashley Babbitt was shot, which happened right outside the chamber." And I looked at him. He was wearing a member pin, but I didn't recognize him. And I said, "How long have you been here?" Meeting in Congress. And he says to me, 72 hours. And I said, 72 hours? He said, "I was just elected." And I didn't know what to say to that. And I just looked at him and I said jokingly, "It's not always like this." And I really didn't know what else to say.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a harrowing day. But I'll tell you, it was also one of those experiences which I think are not uncommon in a traumatic situation where the trauma grows over time. And one particular emotion really grew over time for me, and that was anger at my colleagues in Congress who pushed this big lie about the election and prompted that attack on the Capitol. And even after the Capitol had been attacked, when we went back onto the floor that night, when there was still blood on the ground, they continued trying to overturn the election.
Yeah. I appreciate that you don't just deal with this event in the current context. Part of this book to me is like you're witnessing the fall of the Roman Empire and you're telling people years from now what it was like, at the forefront of it. But I appreciate the fact that you use your own personal story in the book to kind of, serve as a spine as a journey. How important was it for you to use your life and even your heritage as a way to tell kind of this thing that you've witnessed in politics?
I think it was important for me to tell the readers a bit about me. They know me from what they've seen on television, but I wanted them to know where I'd come from, what my family was like. That I was born essentially bipartisan. My mother's side of the family were all Republicans. My father's side of the family were all Democrats. And up until the Trump era, I was not viewed as a particularly partisan member of Congress. And I still don't consider myself to be one. I consider myself very strongly anti-Trump. But at the moment, the Republican Party has ceased to be a party of any ideas or ideology. It's become this autocratic cult around the former president. And I wanted to tell the story of how that happens.
Yeah.
How did he get so many people who I worked with and many of whom I admired and respected because I believed that they believed what they'd been saying, but it turned out they didn't believe it at all. Or if they did believe it, they didn't care about it enough to defend those ideas in the face of a different and greater ambition.
Yeah, it's funny because your political career pretty much started at 9/11, back then. And 9/11 is so fascinating because the whole invasion of Iraq, many people see as the first big lie, the WMD. But, I wanted to ask you personally, how did you view that time? Do you think that, I don't think it was a lie personally. I feel like we just got it wrong. Some people feel it's a lie. Some people think we were intentionally misled. We had Secretary Powell, who just passed away, who's unfortunate. His whole career kind of, unfortunately, kind of looks at that that as the nadir of his career. And he had I think, Powell had a fantastic career. I admired him a lot. But that seems to me to be the first kind of, turning point of disinformation, I guess, of people dealing with that type of thing, and how we deal with information that the government is giving us in this modern era. Do you see that as a starting point also?
I do see it as both an intelligence failure among the most serious, but also I also see it as evidence of politicization of the intelligence. Mm-hmm. I was a fairly new member of Congress at the time, and I was persuaded by Colin Powell, and I was persuaded. I remember being at the White House for a meeting before the vote on Iraq, and mm-hmm. Asking George Tenet, who was at that time the director of the CIA, someone who had served in Democratic administrations and Republican administrations, about his level of confidence in the intelligence that Iraq had an ongoing nuclear program. And I said, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being completely speculative and 10 being absolutely certain, where are you? And he said, I'm a 10. Wow. Now, subsequently, I was appointed to the Intelligence Committee. I learned a lot about how the agencies work and how there's often different opinions within the agencies. And I came to learn that it was certainly no 10 in terms of the intelligence. But I think there was an effort to sell it in the administration.
Do you think it was confirmation bias at that time? Like, I know there was evidence that came from MI6 or something like that, where, England was providing us with a lot of evidence about the uranium and all that kind of stuff, the stockpiles or whatever. And do you think we just trusted something that we shouldn't have trusted, or that the government really wanted to believe this, and the slightest bit of evidence that proved it was going to make their case?
I think there was a strong degree of that kind of confirmation bias. Mm-hmm. And, when you looked at the behavior of Saddam Hussein, right, and the lengths that he was going to throw out inspectors and to thwart the international community, they didn't actually have a program. And, one of the big mysteries is whether Saddam's own people were lying to him. Whether he believed he had a program that he didn't have.
That was one of the theories I remember.
Yeah. But I do think there was such a desire among Dick Cheney in particular, I think George Bush to a lesser degree, but nonetheless, to finish the job that his father had started, that they saw what they wanted to see in the intelligence, and then they really pushed the intelligence in a way that the intelligence didn't support. And in terms of Colin Powell, who I greatly admired and I think was a truly patriotic public servant and a pathbreaker, I have a hard time believing that he would willfully mislead the country.
Yeah, I don't think he did.
I think he like others, myself included, were persuaded by the intelligence we were presented with, mm-hmm. which just wasn't the full picture. And
I always disagreed. This is going to sound weird. I always disagreed with Democrats apologizing for that vote. I always thought you don't have to apologize for that vote. At the time, there was every justification to believe those things, and 9/11 was so fresh. I think it would have seemed odd to not have gone along with the United Nations recommendations at the time. It wasn't just our country, right? I mean, it was the UN sanctions that we were talking about that Saddam was violating time and time again. It would have been tough to have taken a hard stand as a party against that at that time, don't you think?
Well, I think that
individually might have been different, but as a party, it would have been really tough.
I think that it's difficult in 2021 to remember what it was like in the early years after 9/11, and the level of concern about getting it wrong the other way. That is, not dealing with what was perceived to be a real threat to the country. Mm-hmm. But I'll tell you, when the speaker some years later asked me if I would serve on the committee, She asked me, because at that time we needed to do an investigation into why the CIA interrogation tapes had been destroyed.
Yeah.
I got a sense of, what the intelligence process is and how important it was to insulate that from any political interference and also to encourage dissenting voices within the intelligence community. Ironically, and I say ironically because Secretary Powell was leaving the State Department's own intelligence element got it right. They were more skeptical than other agencies in the intelligence community. But I would see far worse politicization of intelligence down the road. In the run-up, for example, to the presidential election, John Ratcliffe, the head of the intelligence agencies, Bill Barr, then Attorney General, were affirmatively and deliberately misleading the country about what China was doing or not doing, and about what Russia, in fact, was doing, hyping the threat to our elections from China when we hadn't seen evidence that the Chinese were interfering in the election, downplaying the significance of what Russia was doing. Unlike the situation I would like to believe with Powell, both Barr and Ratcliffe and others, O'Brien at the National Security Council, were all deliberately and affirmatively misleading the country about what the actual intelligence said.
Wow. I'm so glad that in your book, because I wholeheartedly agree with you in your book about Benghazi. Benghazi to me was a big turning point for a number of reasons. Just the zeal almost with the Republican Party used this tragedy to, in my estimation, even at the time watching it, I felt they were just softening Hillary Clinton for a run for the presidency. It seemed so obvious. I was so angry during those hearings for that. What was your feeling inside of that, Congressman? Did it have the feel of that contemporaneously, or was it only after the fact that it just became, look, what the heck is going on here?
Oh, no, we understood exactly what was going on at the time. The Benghazi Select Committee was, I think, the 7th or 8th congressional investigation into Benghazi.
Yes.
All the others had already debunked all these conspiracies about Hillary Clinton. I served on one of those other investigations. It was done in the Intelligence Committee, led by a then Republican chairman, Mike Rogers. And so we had already done the investigation. McCarthy wanted to set up this select committee because, as he would later admit in an unguarded moment, he wanted to take Hillary's numbers down.
Yeah.
And he bragged about how they succeeded.
I remember.
And it was apparent to those of us, in fact, actually, when it was announced by then Speaker Boehner, who had opposed setting up a select committee to investigate that, which had already been investigated. I was on Chris Wallace's Sunday program, and he asked me whether I thought Democrats should participate. And I said, no, it's going to be a purely political instrument. And why should we give it any legitimacy? And it kind of blew up Fox World. Schiff calls for boycott of Benghazi committee. And my reward ended up being asked to serve on the thing.
Yes, congratulations.
But look, I watched during that 2-year period on the Benghazi Select Committee a harbinger of things to come. When Republicans were willing to exploit the tragic death of 4 Americans, to try to tarnish a presidential candidate. They were willing to invent their own alternate reality well before Kellyanne Conway came along. If Donald Trump had been watching, he must have been really pleased and taken a few notes, because what the Republicans would do thereafter made even Benghazi pale in comparison.
Yeah, it was kind of the reason why I brought it up, it's like the first genesis of the big lie. It's that first form of it, because so many people believed in all these conspiracies about, what Hillary Clinton did at the time. And those conspiracies about her just grew and grew. But I feel like people were always divisive about Hillary, but the conspiracy stuff kind of started with Benghazi, it felt like, where there was a whole another thing attached to her as a person. And I believe those hearings were directly pointed just to the slightly uninformed public. It had nothing to do with what really happened in Benghazi, which was tragic. And it's a very moving portion in your book where you talk about Elijah Cummings and that moment where you allowed the Secretary of State to talk about her friend who passed away too. It was very powerful. I remember that moment.
Well, I have to say, I used to say that I want the 2 years I spent on the select committee, I want those 2 years of my life back.
Yes, yes, I
But
can imagine.
the only good thing that came out of that for me was getting to know Elijah Cummings.
Yeah.
And I really felt that I was, studying at the hand of the master, watching him conduct. Well, he was actually not even conducting the hearings because they were conducted by the Republican chairman, Trey Gowdy.
Mm-hmm.
But he was such a dominant presence in every room he was in.
He was old school in the best of ways. Yeah.
He really was our moral North Star, and just such a wonderful and commanding presence. And, it reminds me of a funny story I tell at an odd, surreal, and at the same time kind of humorous story about a meeting I had with Donald Trump in the Oval Office during the Russia investigation. I didn't want to talk with him about the Russia investigation because I didn't want him to misrepresent what was being said, and he wouldn't allow me to have one of my staff in the room as a witness. And so I was trying to steer the conversation to anything else other than the Russia
Yes, you knew what was coming.
Oh, yes. And so we got on the subject of prescription drugs, or I steered it towards prescription drugs. And
Sure.
and I think I mentioned that Elijah Cummings was, pushing, a bill that would allow the government to negotiate prices and bring the cost of medical care down. And the president, Trump, says, Elijah Cummings, he says a lot of nice things about me. And I was thinking to myself, I've never heard Elijah Cummings say anything nice about you. But Elijah was really something else. And I probably have an additional soft spot in my heart for him because my son is named Elijah.
Oh, wow. Yeah, another interesting point in the book, it is nice how you go from personal to professional in it, you talk about your family and everything, but I was struck by how, and I bring this up because once again, as you think about how the Republican Party has gone from just the opposition to something just really different, and the way that they're fractured is different from the way parties have fractured in the past, where they usually come together they're usually over ideological differences and that type of thing. Democrats do it all the time because there's always a real left side of the party and a moderate side of the party. They're doing it all the time. And but this is so different, and it's kind of embodied, and I'd love for you to share it in the episode with Kevin McCarthy on the airplane. Can you share that with us? Because to me, it's different. It's so different than just like Ted Kennedy and, a Republican differing over something and having an argument about it or that type of thing, but finding a way. That this was a different moment. Do you know the moment I'm talking about?
I do. I was seated on a plane flying back to Washington on United Airlines, and just by coincidence, Ken McCarthy was in the next seat, and I didn't know him well.
What year was this about? Do you remember?
This was in the year 2010.
Okay. All right.
About 6 months before the midterm elections. Democrats were in the majority at the time, but the Congress was pretty narrowly divided.
Sure.
And we were having, just nothing of a conversation about who was going to be in the majority after the midterms. And I said that it would be the Democrats, and he said it would be the Republicans. And it was just the kind of conversation you have while you're waiting for the movie.
Sure. Very casual.
Any movie to start. And I thought nothing of it. And we get to Washington, we go our separate ways. And apparently he goes off and he does a briefing for the press. And he tells the press that Republicans are definitely going to win the midterms. Everybody knows it. That he sat next to Adam Schiff on the plane, and that even Adam Schiff admitted Republicans were going to win the midterms. Wow. And I was beside myself when I learned this the following morning. And I made a beeline for him on the House floor. And I said, Kevin, if we were having a private conversation on the plane, I would have thought it was a private conversation. But if it wasn't, you told the press the exact opposite of what I said. And he says, yeah, I know, Adam, but you know how it goes. And I said, no, Kevin, I don't know how it goes. You just make stuff up, and that's how you operate, because that's not how I operate, but it is how he operates. And in that respect, he was really made for a time like this when his party had no devotion to the truth. when they would argue the truth wasn't truth. And Donald Trump would basically tell the American people, you can't believe anything you see. You can't believe anything you hear. You can't believe the press, which is the enemy of the people. You can only believe Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And this is why I think someone of that low character can never be allowed to go near the speaker's office. Among all of the corrosive things that were done to our democracy over the last 4 years, I think among the worst was this relentless assault on the truth. And that little anecdote, sometimes it's nothing more than a conversation on a plane, can be really telling about people. It can be really telling about a time. And in that respect, he was really ahead of his time.
He definitely was ahead of his time. It really, to me, it spoke to what is the most cancerous about the whole Trump cult and the whole Trump phenomena is the complete disregard for the truth, complete disregard in so many different ways, where after a while, I think even the American people were so exhausted during the Trump presidency, a lot of people didn't know what to believe or whom to believe, which to me is probably kind of brilliant when you just break down people's resistance. You were one of those people who felt Trump had no chance, right, when he was running. Had you had any encounters with him before that at all in any situation? Did you have any?
I had met him very briefly. I want to say maybe 10 years before. I was with a group of other members of Congress. And I remember walking out of the meeting thinking, that guy's full of baloney. I used a little sharper language than that. And he just seemed like a complete con man to me.
Right.
And when he did run for president, you're right, Larry, I not only couldn't believe he could become president, I couldn't believe that there was a chance that he'd be the Republican nominee even. And I used to tell this joke when I was out on the stump that there was no way that Donald Trump was going to become the Republican nominee for two reasons. The first is Republicans weren't that crazy. And the second was Democrats aren't that lucky.
I think
you
got only one of those right.
That's true. That's true.
Turns out Republicans are that crazy.
They sure are. Oh my God. But you're right. I mean, it's really astonishing. In 4 short years, this deeply flawed human being completely remade one of America's 2 great parties in his own image.
Absolutely.
And so, how does that happen?
Yes, that's what I want to ask you. So did Trump, see, I don't think Trump so much divided us as he exposed this unseen division. There's a lot of divisions that we're aware of. I know that doesn't make sense. But there's this unseen thing that's going on where this Bengali can come in and, with his Pied Piper approach, lead people into this world of this make-believe. Like, how does that happen? How did Trump expose that was there? Because I do believe, as much as you were surprised on your side, I believe the Republicans were surprised also at the time. They didn't see that coming. How did Trump do that? What is it about him that allows him to do that?
Well, I think he's like a lot of autocrats and a lot of con men who speak with complete conviction, even while they're speaking total falsehood. And they offer people a very simple explanation for a very difficult problem. The argument that Trump made during the 2016 campaign that concerned me the most was when he would talk to what he described as the forgotten people. Millions of Americans who were struggling to get by. They were at the point of retiring, but had nothing set aside. Their health care was uncertain. Their children, if they were lucky enough to go to college, graduated in debt and with no job. And he told people that a couple of things. He told them that he would never forget about them, that he would improve their lot. Of course, he never did. He also told them that their hardships were due to people who didn't look like them. And he also added a further bit of poison by arguing that those other people, those Democrats, they look down on you. And if you can persuade people that the other party condescends to them, they will never support the other party. And I think that for folks that were kind of at the end of their rope, here was this guy promising to break everything. They'd had a Clinton presidency, they'd had a Bush presidency. Their lot hadn't really improved, and here was this election. There was this guy on the left promising a revolution, but when he wasn't available anymore, there was this guy on the right promising to break everything, and he did. And I think that there was also an element of this, Larry, which I've seen in other autocrats. And I think about Erdogan in Turkey, for example.
Sure, absolutely.
You might remember, several years ago, Erdogan was running for re-election.
I do remember.
And there were these tapes of him on the phone with his son saying, hide the money, the police are coming, hide the money. Right. And the son says, don't worry, Dad, I've hidden all but about 32 million. And I don't think Erdogan even tried to deny it was him or deny the corruption. But the argument that he made instead, although he didn't make it in quite this direct terms, was, sure, I'm a crook. They're all crooks. We're all crooks, but I'm your crook.
Right.
And I think Donald Trump was making basically the same argument. He was calling everyone else a liar and saying everybody else was corrupt and crooked Hillary and blah, blah, blah. And persuaded a lot of people that everybody is a crook. And he's a crook. He just doesn't make any bones of it.
Yeah, it's funny because those kind of political games go all the way back to Tammany Hall, and that type of thing. I felt Trump tapped into something more too than just the economic thing. I think he was the Republican that wasn't afraid on the social issues, on the culture issues, I should say, and I think a lot of people on that side, as you correctly point out, who felt forgotten on the economic front, I think a lot of them felt forgotten on the cultural front too. And that there's this left takeover of the culture there, and nobody was their champion. Because I predicted Trump was going to win based on this, Adam. This is going to sound ridiculous. Based on that first debate where he admitted to calling Rosie O'Donnell a pig. But he said, "You called women pigs." He said, "No, just Rosie O'Donnell." Audience erupted, applauded, and the fervor with which they clapped for him basically calling a woman a pig. I said, "This man isn't going to win. He's gonna win."
Wow.
He's connecting, and I said it on my show. And they're like, "Larry, you're crazy," because we were like a year out at that time. I said, "Guys, he's connecting in a way that nobody else is, on something. I don't get what it is, but it was my spidey sense. I didn't want to believe it."
Well, I'm going to you for that spidey sense in the future.
But there's something in that connection that he has with people. That's that Svengali thing that I'm talking about, where they feel he's the one that's not afraid to say things that they would like to say.
I think there's a lot of truth to it. I looked at it from a different perspective. I think your analysis is right, but I remember early in the Trump administration, watching people that I join the administration and sacrifice themselves to this.
Right. Yes.
And I thought,
so true.
His flaw is like metastasizing through the federal government.
Yeah.
But then I remember watching him after the Kavanaugh hearings, and he was doing a rally. I can't remember what city it was in. I write about this in the book. And he's mocking Dr. Blasey Ford.
Right.
This victim of sexual assault. He's mocking her. He's doing this invented dialogue with her. And what was so striking to me was not what he was doing, but what the crowd was doing behind him on the risers. They were laughing and carrying on. They were totally enjoying him mocking this woman of courage, this victim of sexual assault. And I thought back to her testimony when she said the most painful thing about that day when she was assaulted was that they were laughing at her as they left. And here she has to endure, part of the country laughing at her, being mocked by the president, our friggin' president of the United States. And I thought to myself at that moment that virus of his immorality was now infecting the country. But your analysis may be more accurate than mine, Larry, because, far from infecting the country, maybe what he was doing was really sort of pulling the cover off and showing the infection was already there.
I think so. I mean, when you think about it, Tucker Carlson, is kind of doing that every night. He's giving oxygen to that type of ridiculing those type of people, and I started on the Daily Show a lot of my public life that people know me from, and we would do things from a satirical point of view. It was more, I guess, smart ridicule, that type of thing, but there was always a point to it. It was never just partisan in that way. I've never seen anything like this on a news channel where someone has taken basically what Trump does and makes it a show every night, not to turn this into a thing about that, but I think there's a parallel with what Tucker is doing and what Trump, the type of red meat that he feeds that audience.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And more than that, I'm convinced that had Richard Nixon had Fox, he would have never been forced to leave office.
Yeah.
Fox allows the former president's supporters to live in their own world, a world of alternate facts. And I think that the destructive impact of that is incalculable. Tucker Carlson is now extolling Viktor Orban, the wannabe dictator in Hungary, as now the preferred governance model for the Republican Party.
That's his boy.
CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Committee, they're having their convention in Budapest because they think that authoritarianism is now the way to go.
Yeah.
And you combine that with Trump out there pushing the big lie about the election. If we can't rely on our elections to solve our differences and decide who's to govern, then what's left but violence?
I know. Congressman, I appreciate that you took the time in your book to talk about the whole Russia thing, because there's so much confusion out in the world on that. A lot of it was conflated at the time, I believe, too. I felt there was the idea that the possibility of Russia had colluded with the Trump team, and the separate thing, which to me, they're two separate things, and they were always treated as the same, the separate thing that Russia might have interfered with the election. What was the Russian role, in that election? Can you just give us in plain language as much as possible what you see after now we've done the Mueller investigation and all this stuff? What actually happened in 2016?
I'm glad you asked that. And I do take a few pages to just simply lay out what did we learn after all this?
Right.
Because the country learned it in a 2-year period in little bits and pieces. And those little bits and pieces were often obscured by the presidential megaphone of no collusion, no obstruction.
Yes.
But what we learned was just damning. On the first issue of Russian interference, it was overwhelming. They launched a massive social media campaign to promote Donald Trump and attack Hillary Clinton, and pushed out narratives that Hillary Clinton was in poor health. Basically all the things that Donald Trump was using to attack her, and further polarizing the country along racial lines and ethnic origin and immigration status, and sexual orientation, you name it.
And they've done this sort of thing before, though. That wasn't their first rodeo, right?
It wasn't their first rodeo, but it was of a scale and scope that we had never seen before. But that wasn't it. I mean, they also hacked into Democratic Party organizations, stole tens of thousands of emails, and then started leaking them. So
did the Russians do that, or did WikiLeaks do that?
No, the Russians did that.
Okay, the Russians did
that. And this brings me to the collusion evidence, because once the Russians hacked Hillary's emails, they hacked the Democratic Party and the DCCC emails.
Right.
They informed the Trump campaign through a guy named George Papadopoulos that they had these stolen emails and that they could help the Trump campaign by anonymously releasing them through cutouts. Now, we would later learn the cutout they would use would be WikiLeaks. They created their own cutout called DC Leaks, but the primary cutout was WikiLeaks. So at the time they informed Papadopoulos, who was a foreign policy advisor on the Trump campaign, that they could help the campaign this way. The Clinton campaign didn't even know it had been hacked. Right. So ironically, I think the Trump campaign found out what the Russians were doing to the Clinton campaign before the Clinton campaign found out about it. But basically, this was the first outreach. And that would be followed very soon thereafter by the Russians writing to the president's son through an intermediary, saying that we have dirt on Hillary Clinton that is part of the Russian government's effort to help the Trump campaign.
Now, let me ask you this, as someone who's dealt with intelligence a lot and that sort of thing, is that a couple of things that are happening there? And the one that's dangerous to me is it feels like, you know, in the book Jurassic Park, there's this great scene. It didn't happen in the movie, in the book, where the raptors are testing the fence, you know, to kind of see the, you know, how they can get out. It feels like the danger part of that is the Russians are really testing Trump. You know, it seems like to me, like, how far is this guy going to go? Can he be compromised in any way? What's our relationship here? It almost feels like it's a feeling out more than anything else.
Oh, I think that's absolutely right. And that's part of Russian tradecraft.
Yes. That's classic KGB, right?
A classic KGB, SVR, that's their tradecraft, where they will make an approach and they'll test the water. So they make approach first to this guy, George Papadopoulos. Then they make another approach, this time directly to the president's son. And what does the president's son say when the Russians are dangling dirt on Hillary Clinton? He says, if it's what you say it is, I would love it. And he even tells the Russians the best timing would be in the late summer. Well, in the late summer, they have this, or actually in the midsummer, they have this meeting now in Trump Tower. A Russian delegation meets with Don Jr., Jared Kushner, and the campaign chairman for the Trump campaign, Paul Manafort, with the promise of getting dirt on Hillary Clinton. They have this secret meeting at the Trump headquarters. And the only disappointment, they got some dirt at the meeting, but they didn't get the dirt they really wanted, which was these stolen emails.
Right.
And not long thereafter, Donald Trump, in a public press conference, says, hey, Russia, if you're listening, hack Hillary's emails. And later that day, they actually tried another hack of Hillary's emails. And so you have the Russians making an approach to one person, then the Russians making an approach to the president's son, and then the president himself, if the Russians still had any doubt about this, tells them, I want to play ball. And it's not long after that the Russians give these stolen emails to WikiLeaks to start dumping. But there's one other key piece of evidence that to me is the most damning. And that is Paul Manafort, campaign chair for Donald Trump, starts to secretly meet with an agent of Russian intelligence.
Right.
And what does he give this agent of Russian intelligence? Their internal polling data, as well as their strategic thinking in terms of the battleground states. Now, why would he do this? Well, the Russians at that very moment that Manafort is giving them internal polling data are targeting a social media campaign to elect Donald Trump.
Let me ask you this. Is the CIA aware of this in real time?
The intelligence community was not aware of most of this in real time. Now, the intelligence community was aware of the Russians doing the social media campaign. They were aware that the Russians had hacked the Democratic Party emails.
And that was when Obama really didn't say anything at the time that he was informed of this, right? He decided to wait till after the election, right? Yes, and I write about this too, because this was quite excruciating. I remember being in what we affectionately call the bunker, the space 3 floors below the Capitol where the Intelligence Committee meets, and being on the phone with Dianne Feinstein, who was at that time the senior person on the Senate Intelligence Committee when I was the senior one on the House Intelligence Committee. And it was basically, are you seeing what I'm seeing? And are you as alarmed by this as I am? And what we were seeing was the intelligence about the Russians getting involved in trying to help elect Donald Trump. And so we both weighed in with the administration, the Obama administration, and urged them to call the Russians out, to make it public, let the American people know what was going on. But there was a great reluctance in the Obama administration to do that because they thought it would play into Donald Trump's argument that they were trying to rig the election in Hillary's favor. But, you know, our argument was the American people deserve to know. And they can use that information in whatever way they want, but they should know. Ultimately, Senator Feinstein and I released our own statement, but that doesn't have the power
of the president.
The
Now the Obama administration, to its credit, did release a statement, not from Obama personally, but from two agency heads. But the day they released that statement was the day that the Hollywood tapes came out.
Yes,
And if you think it got any attention in the wake of those tapes, of course, you'd be mistaken. But my feeling,
I love that America didn't care about either one.
Yeah.
Either one.
Yeah. No, that's all too true.
I mean, it's sad to me. The subtitle of your book is How We Almost Lost Our Democracy and Still Could. When you look at the Trump years, what stands out to you the most as the thing that is the killer of a democracy?
Well, I would have to say that it's not any flaw in our Constitution. It's not a flaw in the remedy of impeachment. It's the fact that at this moment in time, those who are charged with living up to the spirit of those provisions are failing to uphold their oath of office. And it doesn't matter really how brilliantly the Constitution is written. If you don't apply right and wrong, if you're not willing to acknowledge the truth, none of it works. And that to me is the paramount danger and the reason why our system has foundered. But I do want to mention, Larry, and I devote a lot of time in the book to this because people really need optimism as well as the sense of urgency. And there were a lot of heroes that came out of the last few years who I found deeply inspiring and I think can be inspiring to the American people. And I wanted to write about them. People like Marie Yovanovitch, this brave ambassador to Ukraine who was hounded out of her post. Who was told not to
by her own president, trashed by her own president. It's crazy.
You know, she had served in dangerous places around the world like Mogadishu.
Yes.
But she was most at risk possibly when she was in Ukraine, and not because of Ukrainians, because the president and his son and Sean Hannity and Tucker Carlson and all of these others were smearing her. To the point where the State Department got on the phone to her and said, you need to be on the next plane out. And of course, in that now infamous call between Donald Trump and the Ukrainian President Zelensky, he says that some bad things are going to happen to Marie Yovanovitch.
Yes, the President of the United States. That was shocking to me, and especially seeing it in your book. I get so mad when I think of these things. The President of the United States says that about a citizen of the country, a diplomat, his own diplomat. He says that.
It really is just breathtaking. And I'll tell you, what made me a convert to the cause of impeachment, because I was not an early advocate of impeachment. I wasn't one of those folks who, the moment Donald Trump got elected, said we need to impeach him.
Sure, some people were calling for it in January of 17. Let's be honest about it.
That's true. That's true. But even during the Mueller investigation and our own investigation, I was making the argument: let's finish the investigation and then decide what should be done about it. He went to the point of writing an op-ed in the New York Times saying Democrats don't take the bait on impeachment. But what made me a convert, what made me convinced that was the road we needed to take, was the fact that the day after Bob Mueller testified, the day after Donald Trump felt he finally escaped the jailer, there was going to be no accountability for his solicitation of Russian help and all his lies about it. The day after that, he was on the phone with the president of Ukraine seeking a different country's help in cheating in another election, just like he had in the first. And that said to me that the fact he was not fully held accountable for his Russian misconduct led directly to even greater misconduct. And indeed, this was one of the points I made during that impeachment trial, which is if senators didn't uphold their oath, if they knew he was guilty and yet voted to acquit, that we could expect him to try to cheat again in new and even worse ways. And of course, that's what's happened in 2020, to the point where it caused thousands of people to attack their own capital.
Are those, just a couple more questions, and then we'll take some audience questions for you, Congressman. Let me wrap up our part of the discussion with a couple of questions. So the first one is the people who are in that subgroup. I'll call it a subgroup. I'll give the majority of the people the benefit of the doubt, and say that I don't think that represents all of the Republican Party or even the people that voted for Trump, the people that assaulted the Capitol or who would do such a thing. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. Okay. But does that minority of voices can that voice, which to me is still the strongest voice out there on that side, re-elect President Trump in the next election, or at least be a major part of the energy in the midterms and kind of dictate where the Republican Party is going in the future?
I think the answer is yes. You didn't underestimate him in 2016, but I did. And I think millions of other people did too. And we can't make that mistake again. And look, it's a minority of Americans who believe the lies and nonsense that Donald Trump tells. It's a minority of Americans who support the backward, divisive policies of today's GOP. It's part of the reason why they're so fixated on disenfranchising people, because they know they can't win on the basis of their ideas. Mm-hmm. But it's also the reason why they will welcome anyone into their shrinking party, mm-hmm. Including a bunch of QAnon crazy people who are inspired to take a gun into a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C. because they've been persuaded that there's a child sex ring run by Hillary Clinton under a pizza parlor in Washington. Mm-hmm. We have those QAnon people now serving in Congress, the Marjorie Taylor Greenes of the world. They are welcomed into the GOP. And yes, they could make up enough of his vote to carry him to victory. Okay. But again, just to underscore, so people don't despair, because we don't have the luxury of despair, they are a minority of Americans. We control our own destiny. If we turn out, yes, we win. It's as simple as that. We vote and we win. Okay, we vote and Donald Trump is relegated to the trash heap of history.
Yes, let's hope so. So let me ask you this other part of the question then. I agree with you. And given that the party is in disarray, which it is fractured, why are Democrats doing their best to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory?
Well, if you're referring to the struggle to get the two bills passed, the Congress Build Back Better bill and bill, here's the challenge.
And weakening, and I believe weakening the presidency in the process.
Look, the continued debate over how do we get these bills passed, or whether we get these bills passed, doesn't help anyone, and it certainly doesn't help the president. But the challenge is this: our party is almost nearly unanimous in support of this legislation. The problem is when the Senate is divided 50-50, near unanimity is not enough. You have to be unanimous. And we have a big and beautiful and broad and diverse party where it's hard to get 100% of the people on the same page. But I will tell you this, we're going to get it done. Both of those bills are going to get passed. And they're going to get passed, I think, for a couple of reasons. First, the country desperately needs it. This is the biggest investment in the American people since the New Deal. It'll help seniors with their vision care and their dental care and their hearing issues. It'll help young people afford college. It'll help parents provide childcare for their kids and early childhood education. But there's also the political imperative, which is the one you're talking about, which is if we're not going to get this done, we might as well walk across the aisle and give them the keys and say, we're not interested in driving anymore. And none of us are willing to do that. So frankly, I didn't expect this was going to be pretty. I thought that the first act would be, we would take up the infrastructure bill and it would fail. And that would be Act One. And we needed to get through Act One before we got to the end of the play. My only hope, Larry, is that this is a 2-act play, not a 3-act play.
If I'm going to criticize, look at both parties, I think Mitch McConnell is a master of what he does. I think the Republican Party has focused more on politics, and I think the Democratic Party is focusing more on policy. Nothing wrong with that. But you know, you have one party that's so political in their thinking, and the other party that, thank God, you know, is debating on policy. You know, sometimes the political one wins, you know, in that fight.
Larry, one of the Republicans in the House, in another unguarded moment, said exactly what the Republicans are doing. He said, you know, what we want is 18 months of chaos and gridlock.
Absolutely. Completely. Plays right in their
where they are. I mean, they were willing to, you know, destroy the nation's credit if it would help them win another seat in the Senate. You know, we don't want to become them. We can't become them, but we need to fight tough, and we need to fight smart, and we need to get ourselves all on the same page. Mm-hmm. You know, I'll give you a perspective one of my colleagues shared with me because I think it's so telling. He asked me, you know, what if I told you at the beginning of this year mm-hmm. that Democrats were going to pass a rescue plan that would lift half the nation's kids out of poverty, help small business stay alive, help people get vaccinated. And that wasn't all. Democrats were also going to pass a $2 trillion infrastructure bill mm-hmm. that would rebuild our roads and our bridges and our electrical grid. But even that wasn't all. We were going to pass a third bill that was going to invest in childcare and higher mm-hmm. education and climate change. And we'd get all that done in a single year. What would you say? And I said, boy, that would be incredible. I would be amazed.
You know what I would say? I would say, is Sleepy Joe pushing that on us?
And we are going to do that. Right. And we shouldn't lose perspective about just how huge that's going to be. Whatever the number of that final Build Back Better bill is, right. Whatever the number is, the combination of those three bills, it's going to be huge. Yeah. And I think give Democrats the most powerful platform to run on.
Yeah, from your mouth to God's ears. Okay, Ted, let's take some questions from our audience. People that
Great, thank you, gentlemen. We have a few questions. First one comes from someone who says, as a Democrat, I'm constantly frustrated by my party's messaging. For example, not enough people know that Build Back Better is paid for. Yet the GOP's message that Dems just spend seems to be what lands with the public. How can the Democratic Party be better on messaging?
So that's kind of my policy versus politics question there. Yeah. How can the Democrats be better politicians, Congressman?
Well, the question about message, I have to say, is the most persistent and frequent criticism that I hear about the Democratic Party. Mm-hmm. And I think it's owing to a couple things, and I don't offer this as
it was a critique of Obama. It was a critique of Obama, by the way.
Oh yeah, and you could hardly find a better messenger than Barack Obama.
Right.
But here's the challenge. We're a very big and diverse party with a lot of diverse perspectives, and it's hard to all sing from exactly the same song sheet when that's the case. Now, I wouldn't trade that diversity for anything. But the other challenge is we don't have the kind of media empire infrastructure that is Fox and Newsmax and OAN and all the rest of that, that helps the Republicans amplify incessantly their very simple but destructive message. So we're never going to have the message discipline that the Republican Party has, but we're going to have to do a heck of a lot better. And you are, I think, pointing to Exhibit A. There are two exhibits I would point to in terms of Build Back Better. One is it's paid for. It's paid for. The number isn't 3.5 or 2.0. The number is 0. It's paid for. But the other thing is Democrats haven't done a sufficient job telling the American people what's in that bill. Often people just call it the reconciliation bill, which is even more mystifying. So we need, I think, to get 2 points across, all the great things that are in the bill and the fact that it's paid for.
Yeah, I think because it's using this arcane reconciliation measure to get it passed, so much time is spent trying to explain that, as opposed to going out and selling the merits of the bill, and people are arguing over how many votes does it need? Why can't you get this vote rather than what are you actually voting for?
And I do think, Larry, that this is going to be a short-lived problem, at least as far as Build Back Better is concerned, because when we do get it passed, we are going out on the road, all of us, including the president, to let the American people know what's in it. And I do think this was a problem that the Obama administration had in not selling the Affordable Care Act and thinking that the job was done when the bill was passed. But we learned from that, no, you got to do good for the people. And then you got to tell them you've done good for the people, and you got to show them how you've done good for them. And so, we get that even if we were slow to get it the first time.
All right, Ted.
What do you feel is our biggest national security threat? Is it China? Is it an external threat, or is it an internal threat?
Well, I think that, and this was a terrible realization for me early in the Trump years. The biggest threat to our democracy doesn't come from Russia, and it doesn't come from China. It does come from within. And I think the last 4 years have borne that out. I spent almost 6 years in the Justice Department, for example, and to think about how Bill Barr took that department and turned it into this vehicle to defend Donald Trump's corrupt conduct and help people who are covering up for him, and even more dangerous, to use the power of an office of prosecution to go after the president's enemies. It was just devastating for me to see that happen to my old department. But those kind of things are so destructive of our democracy. But even more perilous right now is this big lie that the president and Republicans are pushing about elections, that we can't rely on them. Now that lie is amplified by Russia. Russia is pushing out that lie too. Prior to the 2020 election, Russia was pushing out Donald Trump's lie that there was going to be massive fraud and absentee voting. So they're happy to amplify what Americans are doing to themselves. So the paramount threat is from within. That's not to say there aren't challenges from outside the country. And I think probably the biggest, largest long-term challenge will be China. It is a very worthy rival competitor and a dangerous competitor in every domain: sea, land, air, space, cyber. But most concerning to me is China is persuading a lot of countries around the world that its model is better than ours, that its model can deliver prosperity and it can deliver order. And seeing thousands of people climb up on the Capitol building in insurrection helps to make their point. But their model is totalitarianism. And we need to be competing and winning over hearts and minds around the world, because that model, if other countries adopt it, will lead to even greater disaster.
And our final question, what is the danger if Trump and his allies are not held accountable for the insurrection?
Well, I think the danger is that presidents come to believe in the future, including, God forbid, we ever have a future Donald Trump as president again. They come to believe that they're truly above the law, that they cannot be prosecuted while they're in office, and functionally they can't be prosecuted once they leave office, that they're essentially too big not to fail, because Donald Trump was nothing if not a failed president, but they're too big to be held accountable to the rule of law. That's a really dangerous idea. And in this sense, I do depart, I think, from the current Justice Department. I think that if you or I, Larry, had been on the phone with the Secretary of State in Georgia, trying to coerce them into finding 11,170 votes that don't exist, we would be indicted by now.
Absolutely.
And I do think the Justice Department needs to investigate every crime, including everyone involved in that insurrection, and hold people accountable. And if you ultimately have to make the decision about whether it's in the best interest to go forward with the case or not, that's one thing. But to just ignore it, not even to investigate it, to pretend it didn't happen, I think is to invite tragedy in the future. But again, Larry, just if I can make this final point, because I don't want to leave on such a gloomy end.
Yes.
If I didn't mention earlier, I chose the title "Midnight in Washington," both because it was the title of a closing argument I gave, but also because midnight may be the darkest hour of the day everywhere in the world, but it's also a hopeful time because you know that what's coming next is filled with light. And I really feel we're going to get through this. The country's been through other difficult traumas in the past. This too shall pass. But what each of us do now will determine how quickly it passes. So we all have a role to play right now.
Well, Congressman, I certainly want to share in your optimism. I am an optimistic person. These things are so tenuous too. I'm also afraid of where China is going. I think China has a legitimate claim to be the next superpower for the world to follow in many different ways, and I think we need to be aware of that at every turn. And we have to remind the world, well, why this is the best hope, and why China isn't. But if we're doing things like what we've seen, January 6th and those things, I agree with you. We're not making a good case, we're really not. So let's hope it all works out. The best of luck to you on the Hill, everybody. This is such a good read. And like I said, I love your personal recollections of your family and everything. They're really cool to hear, to get to know you a lot better, Congressman Adam Schiff. Midnight in Washington, you guys, how we almost lost our democracy, but we have not lost it. And he says we're not going to lose it. So
that's right.
Thank you for being in Live Talks Los Angeles.
So good to join you. Thank you, Larry.
Thanks again, Congressman Schiff, and thanks, Larry, for returning to Live Talks Los Angeles yet again. Thanks to those of you who sent in questions. Again, Congressman Schiff's book is Midnight in Washington: How We Almost Lost Our Democracy and Still Could. It is available wherever books are sold, and you can purchase a signed copy in the link below. As we like to say around here, go on gently.